The neon arteries of the Las Vegas Strip pulsed with electric life as midnight approached on July 23rd, 2016. Fountains danced in choreographed perfection outside the Bellagio, while thousands of tourists and high rollers moved through the casino's marble corridors, chasing dreams and feeding the relentless appetite of the house that always wins. The summer heat had finally broken, leaving the desert air crisp and charged with the kind of energy that made anything seem possible in Sin City. But hidden among the legitimate spectacle, something extraordinary was about to unfold in the shadows behind the glittering facade. Security cameras positioned throughout the casino's restricted areas captured what would become one of the most audacious and successful heists in Las Vegas history. A crime so perfectly executed that it would leave investigators speechless and $32 million permanently missing. At exactly 11:47 p.m., those cameras recorded a man in an impeccable black suit walking purposefully through the executive parking garage beneath the Bellagio. He moved with the confident stride of someone who belonged in the exclusive realm where billionaires parked $250,000 automobiles while gambling away the GDP of small nations. His name tag identified him as Eddie Morales, a veteran valet driver who had spent over a decade serving the whims of the world's wealthiest casino patrons. Eddie approached a pristine Rolls-Royce Phantom worth $500,000, its midnight black paint reflecting the harsh, fluorescent lights of the underground garage. But this wasn't just another luxury vehicle waiting to be delivered to its pampered owner. Hidden in the trunk were 12 military-grade duffel bags containing exactly $32 million in untraceable cash. Money that was supposed to be transferred to the casino's ultra-secure private vault, but would instead disappear forever into the Nevada desert. With movements that appeared completely routine to any observer, Eddie slid behind the wheel of the Rolls-Royce and started the engine. The V12 motor purred to life with the smooth power that only British engineering could achieve, providing the perfect soundtrack for what was about to become the crime of the century. Security footage shows him adjusting the rearview mirror, checking his appearance one final time, and then driving calmly toward the exit gate where a single security guard controlled access to the outside world. The guard barely glanced up from his newspaper as the Rolls-Royce approached. Why would he? Eddie Morales was just the valet, an invisible service worker whose job was to move expensive cars from point A to point B without attracting attention or asking questions. The guard waved him through without hesitation, never realizing he was authorizing the largest cash theft in Nevada gaming history. Eddie drove the Rolls-Royce into the blazing lights of the Strip, past the dancing fountains and the crowds of tourists who had no idea they were witnessing history in the making. In 20 minutes, this man would vanish forever, taking with him $32 million that the Bellagio would never recover and leaving behind only questions that remain unanswered 8 years later. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, I need you to do something for me. Smash that like button right now if you're ready to hear how a parking valet outsmarted one of the most secure casinos in the world. Subscribe and hit the notification bell because we're about to reveal details that the FBI kept classified for years. And comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into the mind of a man who pulled off the impossible. Eduardo Eddie Morales understood invisibility better than most people understand success. At 44, he had perfected the art of being simultaneously essential and overlooked, a skill that would eventually make him $32 million richer and turn him into one of America's most wanted fugitives. Born in East Los Angeles to a family of automotive mechanics, Eddie had grown up around cars with the kind of instinctive understanding that couldn't be taught in any classroom. His father, Miguel, owned a small garage that specialized in restoring classic American muscle cars, while his uncle, Roberto, worked as a service manager at a luxury dealership in Beverly Hills. Eddie learned to drive before he learned to read, and by age 12, he could diagnose engine problems by sound alone. The Morales family had always been honest, hardworking people who took pride in their craftsmanship and treated every vehicle like a work of art. Eddie's childhood was filled with the sounds of socket wrenches, air compressors, and his father's patient explanations about how machines worked. Miguel often told his son that cars were like people. Treat them with respect, and they'd never let you down. But Eddie's path diverged from the family tradition when he was 17 and witnessed a fatal accident that claimed his father's life. Miguel had been test driving a restored 1969 Camaro when a drunk driver ran a red light and collided with him at 60 miles per hour. The tragedy left Eddie's mother, Carmen, with overwhelming medical bills and funeral expenses that eventually forced the family to sell the garage and relocate to Las Vegas, where Carmen's sister had promised to help them start over. Las Vegas in the late 1980s was experiencing unprecedented growth, with new casinos opening regularly and creating thousands of jobs for workers willing to serve the needs of wealthy tourists and gamblers. Eddie found work as a parking attendant at several smaller casinos before eventually being hired by the Bellagio, which was preparing to open as the most luxurious gaming destination in the world. Eddie was exactly what we were looking for, recalled Thomas Chen, who served as the Bellagio's valet supervisor during Eddie's early years. He knew cars better than anyone I'd ever met. He was completely reliable, and he understood that our clients expected service that was both professional and invisible. Eddie could park $1 million Ferrari in a space designed for a Honda Civic, and he'd do it with a smile that made every customer feel special. For over a decade, Eddie Morales was the perfect employee. He arrived 15 minutes early for every shift, maintained a spotless appearance that met the casino's exacting standards, and handled the world's most expensive automobiles with the kind of care that made billionaires trust him with their prized possessions. His personnel file contained nothing but commendations from supervisors and thank you notes from grateful customers who appreciated his attention to detail. But beneath the professional exterior, Eddie harbored growing frustration about the enormous gap between the wealth he served and the financial struggles that defined his own life. Every night, he parked Lamborghinis worth more than most people's houses, then climbed into his 12-year-old Toyota Corolla with 180,000 miles and a transmission that slipped in third gear. He watched billionaires tip cocktail waitresses more money than he earned in a month, then went home to an apartment where he counted every dollar to make sure he could cover rent and child support. The divorce had been particularly devastating. Eddie's ex-wife, Maria, had received primary custody of their 2 children, along with substantial support payments that consumed most of his income. His son Michael was 15 and showed the same mechanical aptitude that had defined the Morales family for generations. But Eddie could barely afford to buy him basic tools, let alone the kind of equipment that could nurture genuine talent. His daughter Sophia was 12 and dreamed of attending college, but Eddie's financial reality made those dreams seem impossible to achieve. Medical bills added another layer of stress to Eddie's already precarious situation. His mother, Carmen, had developed diabetes and required expensive medications that weren't fully covered by her Medicare plan. Eddie supplemented her healthcare costs while also supporting his own family, creating a financial burden that grew heavier each month despite his steady employment and occasional overtime opportunities. By 2015, Eddie had accumulated over $80,000 in credit card debt, payday loans, and other high-interest obligations that consumed nearly every dollar he earned. He was working 6 days a week, picking up extra shifts whenever possible. But the mathematics of his situation seemed impossible to escape through legitimate means. Every month, he fell further behind despite working harder than ever. Eddie started talking about feeling trapped, remembered Carlos Rivera, a fellow valet who worked alongside Eddie for 8 years. He'd watched these billionaires drive up in cars that cost more than we'd earn in our entire lives, and you could see it eating at him. He'd joke about what it would be like to just drive away in one of those cars and never come back. But at the time, we thought he was just blowing off steam. Working as a valet at the Bellagio provided Eddie with access to a hidden world that most people never see. The complex infrastructure that supports ultra-high-stakes gambling and the movement of enormous sums of cash that make Las Vegas the entertainment capital of the world. His decade of employment had given him insights into casino operations that even many management personnel didn't possess. The Bellagio catered to a clientele that included foreign royalty, technology billionaires, entertainment moguls, and international financiers who routinely wagered millions of dollars in single sessions. These high rollers required services that went far beyond normal casino operations: private gaming suites, exclusive restaurants, personal security details, and most importantly for Eddie's eventual crime, discretionary cash management that operated outside normal banking channels. Many of the casino's wealthiest patrons preferred to conduct their gambling activities using cash rather than bank transfers or credit lines that could be monitored by tax authorities or business partners. This created a need for sophisticated cash handling procedures that could accommodate transactions worth tens of millions of dollars while maintaining the privacy and discretion that wealthy clients demanded. Eddie learned about these procedures gradually, through conversations with security guards, observations during his valet duties, and occasional requests to assist with what were euphemistically called VIP courtesy services. These services included transporting high-value clients to private meetings, delivering documents or packages to exclusive suites, and occasionally moving vehicles that contained items more valuable than the cars themselves. The revelation that changed everything came during a routine shift in September 2015, when Eddie was asked to move a client's Bentley Continental from the main valet area to a secure parking garage beneath the casino. The vehicle's owner, a Saudi prince who was known for wagering $5 million per night at the baccarat tables, had requested that his car be stored in the ultra-secure facility normally reserved for the casino's own executive vehicles. While parking the Bentley, Eddie overheard a conversation between two security supervisors who were discussing the logistics of moving $40 million in cash from the main vault to a private storage facility that the prince had arranged for his gambling funds. The guards were joking about the sloppy protocols that allowed such enormous sums to be transported using procedures that were more suited to handling laundry than managing fortunes. They were laughing about how the prince insisted on using his own cars for cash transfers because he didn't trust armored vehicles. Eddie later told a federal informant who helped investigators understand his motivations. One of the guards said it was crazy that they were putting tens of millions of dollars in the trunk of a car and trusting a valet to drive it across town. That's when I realized how the system actually worked and how vulnerable it really was. Eddie began paying attention to patterns he had previously ignored. He noticed that certain vehicles arrived with unusual security escorts, that some cars were parked in restricted areas he had never seen before, and that particular clients received services that seemed to involve more than normal gambling activities. They was. Most importantly, he observed that these special procedures relied heavily on trust and routine rather than sophisticated security measures. The cash transfer system was elegant in its simplicity, but vulnerable to exploitation by someone with inside knowledge. High-roller clients who maintained private cash reserves would arrange for funds to be moved between different storage facilities using vehicles that appeared to be conducting normal valet services. The transfers occurred during busy periods when security attention was focused on the gaming floors, and they followed routes that minimized exposure to surveillance systems designed to monitor normal casino operations. Eddie realized that the system's greatest strength, its reliance on trusted employees and established routines, was also its most exploitable weakness. A valet who understood the procedures could potentially intercept one of these transfers by simply performing his normal duties at the wrong time and place, taking advantage of the trust that made the system function smoothly. Eddie spent the better part of 2016 conducting what amounted to an intelligence operation against his own employer, studying every aspect of the Bellagio's cash handling procedures with the methodical patience of a professional spy. He understood that success would require not just opportunity and courage, but comprehensive knowledge of security protocols, timing patterns, and human behavior that govern the casino's most sensitive operations. His first step involved mapping the physical layout of areas he had never been authorized to access. Using his legitimate valet duties as cover, Eddie volunteered for additional assignments that allowed him to observe restricted zones, service quarters, and security checkpoints that were normally beyond his clearance level. He memorized the locations of surveillance cameras, noting their coverage patterns and identifying potential blind spots that could be exploited. Eddie also began studying the casino's staffing patterns with obsessive attention to detail. He learned which security guards worked which shifts, how long their breaks lasted, and which positions were temporarily unmanned during shift changes. He observed that weekend nights, particularly during major events like championship boxing matches or celebrity concerts, created controlled chaos that made unusual activities less likely to attract immediate attention. The technical aspects of the cash transfer system required more subtle investigation. Eddie couldn't ask direct questions without arousing suspicion, so he gathered information through casual conversations, careful observation, and occasional assistance with procedures that gave him brief glimpses into operations normally hidden from service employees. He learned that cash transfers typically occurred between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., when the casino was busy enough to provide cover, but not so crowded that unusual vehicle movements would create logistical problems. The transfers used a rotation of different luxury vehicles to avoid establishing predictable patterns, but they always followed similar routes through the casino's service areas to minimize exposure to public spaces where surveillance was most comprehensive. Most importantly, Eddie discovered that the success of these operations depended on a culture of unquestioning trust. Security personnel, valet supervisors, and other staff members were trained to assume that anyone performing what appeared to be legitimate duties was authorized to do so. The system worked because everyone trusted everyone else, and questioning routine activities was considered unprofessional and potentially embarrassing to important clients. Eddie tested this culture repeatedly by performing small experiments that pushed the boundaries of his normal responsibilities. He volunteered to move vehicles to locations he had never accessed before, offered to assist with tasks that were slightly outside his job description, and even suggested procedural improvements that demonstrated his detailed knowledge of casino operations. In every case, his suggestions were welcomed and his initiatives were praised by supervisors who appreciated his dedication and attention to detail. Eddie became the guy you could count on for anything, recalled Thomas Chen. If we needed someone to handle a difficult client, we'd call Eddie. If there was a vehicle that needed special care, Eddie was our first choice. He'd developed such a reputation for reliability that nobody questioned when he volunteered for unusual assignments or showed up in areas where he wasn't normally scheduled to work. By mid-2016, Eddie had identified a specific vulnerability that could be exploited with minimal risk of immediate detection. The cash transfer system relied on electronic scheduling that could be manipulated by someone with access to the casino's computer network, and the physical security procedures contained timing gaps that a knowledgeable insider could exploit to intercept transfers without triggering alarms or attracting immediate attention. July 23, 2016, represented the convergence of multiple factors that created ideal conditions for Eddie's planned theft. The date coincided with a major boxing match at the MGM Grand featuring two internationally famous fighters, creating the kind of citywide excitement that drew wealthy spectators from around the world and generated the highest casino volumes of the year. The Bellagio was hosting several ultra-high net worth clients who had flown in specifically for the fight, including a technology billionaire from Silicon Valley, a hedge fund manager from New York, and an entertainment mogul from Los Angeles who was known for wagering enormous sums on sporting events. The convergence of these clients created unusual cash flow requirements that stressed the casino's normal procedures and created opportunities for the kind of exploitation Eddie had been planning. Adding to the chaos, a major concert featuring Drake was scheduled at the T-Mobile Arena, drawing thousands of young tourists to the Strip and creating traffic congestion that affected normal business operations throughout the gaming district. The combination of the boxing match and the concert meant that Saturday night would be one of the busiest of the year, with security attention focused on crowd control rather than routine internal procedures. Eddie had requested to work the evening shift specifically because he knew the date would provide optimal cover for his theft. His supervisor had been happy to accommodate the request, appreciating Eddie's willingness to work during one of the most demanding nights of the year when reliable staff members were essential for maintaining service quality. The week leading up to July 23rd had seen Eddie making final preparations that appeared completely routine to anyone observing his activities. He had purchased several burner phones using cash at different electronics stores, explaining to sales clerks that he was buying gifts for family members. He had also acquired high-quality fake identification documents through contacts in Los Angeles, who specialized in providing documentation for undocumented immigrants, paying $5,000 cash for materials that would allow him to establish a new identity if his theft was successful. Most importantly, Eddie had stashed approximately $15,000 in cash reserves at various locations throughout Las Vegas and Southern Nevada. The money represented his entire life savings plus funds borrowed against his credit cards, but it would provide the resources needed to fund his escape plan if everything went according to schedule. On the afternoon of July 23rd, Eddie learned through routine briefings that a major cash transfer had been scheduled for that evening. A Middle Eastern oil executive who maintained a $50 million credit line at the casino had requested that $32 million in cash be moved from the main vault to a private storage facility he had established for an extended gambling session that was expected to last several days. The transfer was scheduled to occur at 11:45 p.m. using a Rolls-Royce Phantom that the executive had specifically requested for the operation. The vehicle would be loaded with cash in the secure underground garage, then driven to the private facility by a trusted valet who would return the car to normal service afterward. From Eddie's perspective, the arrangement was perfect. Large enough to justify the enormous risks he was taking, but routine enough to avoid triggering enhanced security measures. The Bellagio's main gaming floor thrummed with electric energy as Eddie Morales clocked in for what would be his final shift as a legitimate employee. The casino was packed beyond capacity with tourists, high rollers, and celebrities who had come to Las Vegas for the biggest fight of the year. Slot machines chimed continuously, roulette wheels spun with hypnotic rhythm, and the air was thick with cigarette smoke, expensive perfume, and the intoxicating scent of money-changing hands. Eddie moved through his normal pre-shift routine with mechanical precision, reviewing his assigned vehicles for the evening, and checking in with supervisors who briefed him on the special requirements for VIP clients. To any observer, he appeared to be the same reliable employee who had performed these duties flawlessly for over a decade. But beneath the professional exterior, Eddie was running through final mental rehearsals of a plan that would either make him rich beyond imagination or destroy his life completely. At 11:30 p.m., Eddie received the assignment he had been anticipating all day. Supervisor Thomas Chen handed him the keys to a Rolls-Royce Phantom with instructions to retrieve the vehicle from the executive parking garage and prepare it for a VIP courtesy transfer to a private location across town. The assignment appeared completely routine, the same type of special service that Eddie had performed dozens of times for wealthy clients who required discretionary transportation for sensitive business activities. What Thomas Chen didn't know was that Eddie had spent months studying this particular procedure and had identified a vulnerability that would allow him to intercept the cash transfer without triggering immediate alarms. The plan required split-second timing and absolute confidence, but Eddie had rehearsed every movement until they became automatic reflexes that could be executed even under extreme stress. Eddie made his way to the executive parking garage through service corridors that he knew were monitored by security cameras but not actively watched during busy periods when surveillance personnel were focused on the gaming floors. He moved with the purposeful stride of someone performing authorized duties, maintaining the professional demeanor that had made him invisible to security systems designed to detect suspicious behavior. The Rolls-Royce sat in its designated parking space like a $500,000 sculpture, its midnight black paint reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights with mirror-like perfection. Eddie approached the vehicle with the reverent care that he had always shown when handling clients' prized possessions, but his pulse was racing with anticipation of what was about to unfold. The trunk contained 12 military-grade duffel bags arranged with military precision, each containing approximately $2.7 million in untraceable cash that had been collected from various high-stakes gaming operations throughout the previous week. The money represented the kind of liquidity that billionaires required for their most exclusive gambling activities. Funds that existed outside normal banking channels and could be wagered without creating paper trails that might attract unwanted attention from tax authorities or business partners. Eddie performed a quick visual inspection of the bags, confirming that they matched the description he had obtained through careful observation of previous transfers. The cash was predominantly in $100 bills that had been sorted, counted, and banded by the casino's accounting department, then sealed in bags that would normally be transported under armed guard to secure storage facilities. At exactly 11:43 p.m., Eddie started the Rolls-Royce and began driving toward the exit gate, where a single security guard controlled access to the outside world. The route took him through service areas that were designed to be invisible to casino patrons, past loading docks where legitimate supplies were delivered and waste was removed, through corridors where the real business of keeping Las Vegas running occurred away from the glittering facade that tourists saw. The security guard barely looked up from his newspaper as Eddie approached the exit gate. Why would he pay attention to what appeared to be a routine valet operation? Eddie Morales was a familiar face who had been performing similar duties for over a decade without incident. His presence driving expensive vehicles at unusual hours was not just normal, it was expected as part of the premium service that wealthy clients demanded. The guard waved Eddie through without hesitation, never realizing that he was authorizing the largest cash theft in Nevada gaming history. Eddie drove the Rolls-Royce into the blazing neon landscape of the Las Vegas Strip, past the dancing fountains of the Bellagio, and the crowds of tourists who had no idea they were witnessing a crime that would become legendary in law enforcement. And Kingdom, circles. For the next 15 minutes, Eddie drove through Las Vegas with $32 million in stolen cash. Following a carefully planned route that avoided major surveillance checkpoints while blending seamlessly into the normal traffic patterns of a busy Saturday night. The Rolls-Royce's luxurious interior provided a surreal contrast to the magnitude of the crime he was committing. Soft leather seats, climate control set to the perfect temperature, and a sound system that whispered classical music while Eddie transported a fortune that could fund comfortable retirement in any country in the world. At 12:02 a.m. on July 24, Eddie parked the Rolls-Royce in a warehouse district near Henderson, Nevada, where he had prepared a transfer point that would allow him to switch vehicles and begin his escape plan. The location was perfect, isolated enough to avoid witnesses, but connected to major highways that could carry him toward Mexico, California, or any number of destinations where $32 million could purchase new identities and permanent anonymity. The transfer of cash from the Rolls-Royce to Eddie's prepared escape vehicle took exactly 7 minutes and occurred without attracting any attention from law enforcement or security personnel. Eddie had rehearsed the procedure until it became a choreographed routine that minimized his exposure to surveillance systems while maximizing his chances of escaping before the theft was discovered. By 12:15 a.m., Eddie Morales had vanished into the Nevada desert, carrying $32 million in cash and leaving behind only an abandoned Rolls-Royce that would provide investigators with few useful clues about his ultimate destination or his plans for converting stolen money into a new life. The Bellagio's security center erupted in controlled chaos at 1:47 a.m. when the casino's accounting department discovered that their scheduled cash transfer had never arrived at its intended destination. What began as routine follow-up on a delayed delivery quickly escalated into a full-scale investigation when casino officials realized that $32 million in cash had vanished along with one of their most trusted employees. The initial confusion centered on communication failures rather than theft suspicions. Thomas Chen, the valet supervisor, assumed that Eddie had completed the transfer and returned the Rolls-Royce to its normal parking location. The accounting department assumed that the transfer had been delayed due to the unusual chaos created by the boxing match and concert events. The security team assumed that everyone else knew where the money was, and that any delays were part of normal operational variations. It wasn't until the Middle Eastern oil executive inquired about accessing his cash reserves for continued gambling that casino management realized something was seriously wrong. A rapid inventory of the main vault confirmed that $32 million was missing, but the absence of any signs of forced entry or security breaches initially suggested internal procedural failures rather than deliberate theft. The investigation took a dramatic turn when security personnel reviewed surveillance footage from the executive parking garage and discovered that Eddie Morales had driven away with the Rolls-Royce at 11:47 p.m., but had never returned. Further review revealed that Eddie had not checked out through normal employee procedures and that his personal vehicle remained in the staff parking area, suggesting an unplanned departure that was completely inconsistent with his normal behavior. Past patterns. The realization that Eddie had stolen the money was almost as shocking as the theft itself, recalled Thomas Chen. This was a guy who had worked for us for over 10 years without any problems. He'd handled millions of dollars in vehicles and valuables without ever giving us reason to question his integrity. The idea that he could plan and execute something like this was almost impossible to believe. Casino management immediately notified the FBI, recognizing that the theft involved interstate transportation of stolen property and would require federal investigation. Within hours, Special Agent Maria Santos and a team of specialists were reviewing evidence and beginning what would become one of the most intensive manhunts in Nevada law enforcement history. The abandoned Rolls-Royce was discovered at 6:30 a.m. by a security guard making routine patrols of the Henderson warehouse district. The vehicle had been wiped clean of fingerprints and contained no evidence that could provide immediate leads about Eddie's escape route or destination. The trunk was empty except for debris that suggested the cash bags had been transferred to another vehicle. But surveillance systems in the area had been disabled or were non-functional, preventing investigators from determining what type of vehicle Eddie had used for his getaway. Eddie's apartment provided few additional clues about his plans or whereabouts. The residence had been systematically emptied of personal belongings, important documents, and anything that might have sentimental or practical value for someone planning to disappear permanently. Missing items included family photographs, personal papers, computer equipment, and clothing that suggested Eddie had been preparing for his departure for weeks or possibly months. Bank records revealed that Eddie had been gradually liquidating his modest assets over the previous month, converting savings accounts and retirement funds into cash that could be easily transported. His checking account contained less than $200, and his credit cards had been paid to zero balances, suggesting that he had been preparing to abandon his legitimate identity completely. Eddie had planned this theft with extraordinary attention to detail, Agent Santos noted. He understood that success would depend not just on stealing the money, but on disappearing so completely that we couldn't track his movements or predict his ultimate destination. Every piece of evidence suggested that he had been planning this crime for months and had prepared contingencies for multiple scenarios. The FBI's investigation of Eddie Morales' disappearance quickly expanded into an international manhunt, involving law enforcement agencies throughout North and South America. The Bureau's specialized teams analyzed every aspect of Eddie's background, financial history, and personal relationships, searching for clues that might predict his escape route or identify accomplices who could be assisting his efforts to remain hidden. The investigation revealed that Eddie had been extraordinarily careful about avoiding digital footprints that could compromise his escape plan. His personal computer had been professionally wiped using military-grade data destruction software, and his cell phone had been abandoned in his apartment with all data deleted. Credit card records showed no unusual purchases that might indicate preparation for extended travel, and bank transactions provided no insights into how he might be funding his life as a fugitive. More disturbing, Eddie appeared to have planned his theft without involving accomplices who could be traced and pressured to provide information about his whereabouts. Unlike many major crimes that involve multiple participants and create opportunities for investigators to exploit relationships and communications, Eddie's operations seemed to be entirely solo, eliminating one of law enforcement's most effective tools for tracking fugitives. Border security agencies throughout the southwestern United States received Eddie's photograph and biometric information within hours of the theft being discovered, but no border crossings were recorded under his known identity. Mexican authorities were notified and began monitoring airports, bus stations, and highway checkpoints for anyone matching Eddie's description. But the enormous volume of legitimate cross-border traffic made systematic surveillance extremely challenging. Intelligence analysts identified several potential escape routes that Eddie might have used to reach destinations where $32 million could provide comfortable anonymity. Mexico offered proximity and familiar culture, while South American countries like Argentina and Colombia provided sophisticated financial services and limited cooperation with American law enforcement. Alternative possibilities included Caribbean nations, where banking secrecy laws and corrupt officials could protect wealthy fugitives indefinitely. The investigation was complicated by Eddie's apparent transformation from trusted employee to sophisticated criminal without any obvious warning signs or preparation that could be detected through normal background monitoring. Unlike many white-collar criminals who develop expensive lifestyle habits or make suspicious financial transactions before committing their crimes, Eddie had maintained his modest living standard and unremarkable behavior patterns until the moment he disappeared. Eddie Morales represents law enforcement's worst nightmare, explained Dr. Rebecca Thompson, a criminal psychologist who consulted on the investigation. He was a clean-skin operative who spent years in position without arousing any suspicion, then executed a nearly perfect crime before vanishing completely. His patience, planning, and operational security make him extremely dangerous, but also make him likely to remain free as long as he maintains the discipline that made his theft possible. As months passed without any credible sightings or evidence of Eddie's whereabouts, investigators and amateur detectives developed numerous theories about his ultimate fate and current location. These theories range from logical assumptions based on available evidence to elaborate conspiracy scenarios that reflected the almost mythical status Eddie had achieved in criminal folklore. The most widely accepted theory among law enforcement professionals suggests that Eddie fled to Mexico immediately after the theft, using prepared documentation to cross the border before authorities realized he was missing. Mexico's proximity to Las Vegas, cultural familiarity for someone of Eddie's background, and limited cooperation with American law enforcement would make it an ideal refuge for a fugitive with substantial financial resources. Intelligence analysts believe Eddie could have established himself in Mexico City or another major urban center where $32 million would provide exceptional quality of life while allowing him to blend into large populations of wealthy expatriates. Mexican banking systems and real estate markets would allow someone with cash resources to establish legitimate-appearing businesses and investments that could support comfortable living indefinitely. Alternative theories focus on South American destinations where banking secrecy laws and systematic corruption create environments where wealthy fugitives can purchase protection from local officials. Countries like Colombia, Venezuela, and Bolivia have histories of harboring American criminals who can afford to pay for official indifference, and their sophisticated drug trafficking networks provide infrastructure that could help convert stolen cash into legitimate assets. A more dramatic theory suggests that Eddie was killed by organized crime figures who discovered his theft and decided to eliminate him while keeping the money for themselves. This scenario would explain his complete disappearance and the absence of any credible sightings. But investigators have found no evidence of organized crime involvement in the original theft or Eddie's subsequent fate. Some amateur investigators have proposed that Eddie never left the United States but instead established a new identity using sophisticated documentation and plastic surgery that would allow him to hide in plain sight. This theory suggests that $32 million could purchase the kind of complete identity transformation that would make detection virtually impossible, especially for someone who understood how casino security systems worked and could avoid triggering surveillance networks. The most optimistic theory from Eddie's perspective suggests that he successfully reached a non-extradition country where he purchased citizenship and legal protection that would prevent American authorities from apprehending him even if his location became known. Several Caribbean and Pacific nations offer citizenship by investment programs that could provide legal sanctuary for someone with sufficient financial resources. The reality is that Eddie Morales had significant advantages that most fugitives don't possess, Agent Santos noted. He had substantial financial resources, no known accomplices who could be pressured to provide information, and over a decade of experience observing how security systems and investigations actually work. If he maintained the discipline and patience that made his theft possible, he could remain free indefinitely.